is doorbell camera footage from that morning that most people never saw. It shows a man running alone through a residential street in Shreveport, Louisiana, while the city behind him was still waking up. No accomplice, no second person, no chaos, just a man moving fast and low through the early morning dark in the direction of his own end. And here's the thing about that footage that the press conference never said out loud. He was not panicking. He was not running from something that had spiraled out of control. He was not a man in crisis scrambling for an exit. He was calm, deliberate, executing the final step of something that had already been completed. The children were already dead when that footage was recorded. He had already moved through every room. He had already made every choice. And what that camera caught was not a man falling apart. It was a man who had finished what he came to do and was walking toward whatever came next. I came back to this case because you made me. The comments under Part 1 did not stop. They kept coming. Hundreds of them, then thousands. And no matter how many times I read through them, the same questions kept rising to the top. Why did he kill his own children? Who was the second woman? What is her full story? Was he on something? What happened on the dinner date with his daughter the night before? And one question that kept appearing in the more private corners of the comment section, one I am going to address directly before this video is over. So I went back. I pulled every confirmed source, every family statement, every court record, every verified social media post. I watched that doorbell footage. I read the official Shreveport Police Department minute-by-minute timeline that was read on camera, and that most coverage buried or skipped entirely. And I am going to tell you everything I found. This is the real motive behind what Shamar Elkins did on April 19, 2026. And by the time we are done, there will be no more questions left unanswered. Welcome back to Crime Motives. And if you are coming to this channel for the first time through Part 1, welcome. This is the place where we go past the headline, past the press conference, and into the story that actually explains what happened and why. I want to say something before we go any further. The comment section under the first video on this case is one of the most engaged this channel has ever seen. You asked the right questions. You pushed for the follow-up. You kept this story alive when the news cycle was already moving on. This video exists because of that. So if you have not subscribed yet, do it now. Hit the like button and drop a comment before we go any further. Tell me what question from Part 1 brought you back here tonight. We read every single one. Now let's get into everything I found. Before we get to the motive, before we get to the timeline, before we get to the questions your comments demanded answers to, we have to go back further than Part 1 went. Because the story of who Shamar Elkins became begins somewhere that almost no coverage has touched. It begins with a boy he was before Cedar Grove knew his name, for any reason at all. Shamar Dwan Elkins was born on January 1, 1995 in Shreveport, Louisiana. He never left. Cedar Grove was his neighborhood, his block, the whole geography of his life, from the beginning to the end. But the version of Cedar Grove that Shamar Elkins grew up in was not the version that his neighbors later described when they talked about a man who sat on his porch and waved. His biological mother, Mahalia Elkins, gave birth to him when she was a teenager. She was battling a crack cocaine addiction. She could not raise him. That is not a detail I am including to generate sympathy for what he did. Nothing that happened to Shamar Elkins in childhood explains or excuses the decision he made at 5 a.m. on April 19th. But it is a detail that matters because it is the foundation of who he was. A child born into instability, into absence, into the specific kind of wound that comes from a mother who is present in your life as a concept, but not as a person. A family friend named Betty Walker stepped in. She became the woman who actually raised Shamar Elkins from childhood. Betty Walker was his stability, his foundation, the person who filled in the space that his mother left behind and who loved him as if the gap between them had never existed. Mahalia and Shamar only reconnected more than a decade ago, after he was already an adult, already serving in the Guard, already building the life that would end the way it ended. She was not there for the years that shape a person. Betty Walker was. The last time Betty Walker saw him was the weekend before the shooting. He brought his entire family to her house for dinner. His children, Shaniqua, everyone. She said he seemed completely normal. Whatever had closed around him by that point, And something had, we know that now. It was not visible to the woman who knew him better than almost anyone on earth. When her phone rang Sunday morning and she understood what had happened, she said, my babies are gone." She was not talking about children she had heard about on the news. She was talking about children she had held. His biological mother, Mahalia, texted him the Tuesday before the shooting asking about the children. He replied that everyone was doing okay. On Thursday, she texted, "I love y'all. Give my grandson and my granddaughters a kiss from Grandma." He never texted back. He was already inside whatever had closed around him by then. The grandmother was asking for a kiss to pass along to grandchildren who would be dead before she could receive it. He enlisted in the Louisiana Army National Guard in August 2013 at 18 years old. He served 7 years as a signal support system specialist and a fire support specialist. Both roles involve weapon systems, coordinating firepower, operating under pressure in high-stakes environments where the mission continues regardless of what you are feeling internally. He was never deployed overseas. He left in August 2020 as a private, the lowest enlisted rank, and came back to Cedar Grove with no documented transition support on public record. 7 years of that training. 7 years of learning to function, to execute, to keep moving regardless of internal state. And then the uniform came off and there was nothing. No structured transition, no documented reintegration support, no framework for taking what the military had built inside him and redirecting it into the life he was walking back into. He came home to Cedar Grove, to relationships that were already complicated, to a life that did not have the structure the Guard had provided, and he was expected to simply continue. He went to work at UPS. His co-worker Willie Vasher described him to the New York Times as someone who seemed like a devoted family man. Showed up, did his job, seemed present, but Vasher noticed something he could not explain away. Something that once you know it, you cannot unknow. Elkins had a bald spot on his head, not from genetics, not from aging, from a nervous tic. He pulled his hair out throughout the workday, strand by strand, every single shift, due to stress that had nowhere else to go. His mother had noticed it too. The bald spot was visible to everyone who spent time around him, and not one person, not at UPS, not in Cedar Grove, not in his family circle, asked what it meant. A man sitting in front of you pulling his own hair out from stress while he smiles and does his job and seems like a devoted father is telling you something. He is not hiding it. His body is saying it out loud. And the world around him heard it the same way it heard every other signal this case produced, and moved on. Now, the question the comment section asked more than any other. The motive. Not the classification, not domestic incident, which is a category, not an answer. The actual motive. The thing that moved a man who sat on his front porch watching his children play in the yard on Saturday afternoon to walk through those homes before sunrise on Sunday morning. Here is what is now confirmed, on the record, sourced directly. Shaniqua Pugh did not simply file for divorce. She filed citing infidelity. That detail was confirmed directly to CNN by Troy Brown, Elkins' own brother-in-law, the man who lived in that house, the man who tried every day in the final weeks to reach him. He was cheating. She found out. She filed. Let that sit for a moment, because the image of Shamar Elkins as the man who did not want to lose his wife, the man his brother described as saying, "Bro, I do not want to lose my wife," with a desperation unlike anything Brown had ever heard from him, sits next to the fact that he was the one who broke the marriage. She did not leave because she fell out of love. She left because he was unfaithful. She filed a legal document that named infidelity as the reason, and he responded to the consequence of his own choices by deciding that the consequence was unacceptable. But here's the part that reaches backward in time and rewrites the entire story. Before they were even married, Shaniqua had considered leaving him. She had thought about it, made the internal decision, moved toward an exit. And when she did, Elkins told her directly, in plain, specific language that left no room for interpretation, that if she ever left him, he would kill her, their children, and himself. She heard that threat. She believed enough to stay. She married him in April 2024. And when she finally filed for divorce 2 years later, when the marriage he had fractured with his own infidelity became something she was legally ending, that threat which had been sitting inside their relationship since before the wedding, became the blueprint for what happened on the morning of April 19th. He had told her exactly what he would do. She survived the threat the first time. She did not survive the execution. Now let's talk about the timing, because the timing is the clearest evidence we have of how deliberate this was. They were due in court on Monday, April 20th, the morning after the shooting. The divorce papers were ready to be signed. The marriage that he had warned her years earlier he would kill everyone over if she tried to leave was about to be legally dissolved in a courtroom on a specific day, at a specific time, that he had known about for weeks. The evening before, Saturday, April 18th, he took his eldest daughter out for dinner. Just the two of them. He posted about it with laughing emojis. He came home. He was calm when Troy Brown left for work at 9 p.m. He was calm when Freddie Montgomery saw him sitting on the porch that afternoon, watching the children play. And somewhere between that dinner with his daughter and 5 a.m. the next morning, something final locked into place. Not a breakdown, not a spiral, a decision that had been made before that evening and that had simply arrived at its execution point. Now I want to address directly the question that kept surfacing in the more private corners of the comment section. Multiple posts circulating on Facebook and TikTok, unconfirmed by any official source, unconfirmed by any named investigator, and not addressed by any family member on record, suggested that the infidelity Shaniqua cited in her divorce filing may have involved another man, that Elkins may have been living a private life that was hidden from everyone around him, a dimension of his identity that nobody in Cedar Grove knew about, and that the exposure or potential exposure of that dimension may have deepened the crisis around the divorce filing. I want to be precise about what is confirmed and what is not. What is confirmed? The divorce was filed for infidelity. The nature of that infidelity has not been publicly specified by any official source. No family member on the record has named it. No investigator has addressed it publicly. Whether there was a hidden dimension to his personal life that deepened the crisis is something this investigation has not addressed openly. It may never be addressed, but this community asked it directly, and it deserved to be named for exactly what it is, an unconfirmed, widely circulating question about a man who, by every account, kept an entirely different face turned toward the world than the one that walked through those doors before sunrise. I am not confirming it. I am not speculating beyond what was circulating publicly. What I am saying is that the question exists, that the community has a right to know it exists, and that the full answer belongs to an investigation that has not yet provided it. Before we get to the minute-by-minute timeline of what happened across those 4 crime scenes, I need you to share this video. Not for the numbers, because the comment section that drove this follow-up is proof that people are paying attention to this case in a way that the news cycle is not. Share it with someone who needs to understand what the warning signs of this kind of violence actually look like in real life. Share it with someone who might be in a situation that rhymes with this one. These 8 children deserve a conversation that outlasts the headlines. Share it, and drop your location in the comments right now. We want to know where in the world Crime Motives is reaching tonight. Now let's talk about everything the people around Shamar Elkins saw. Everything that was visible. Every signal that reached the ears and eyes of people who loved him or worked alongside him or lived under the same roof. Because this is the part of the case that is going to stay with you long after the video ends. Not because the signals were subtle, but because they were not. In February 2026, 2 full months before the shooting, Shamar Elkins tried to take his own life. That is confirmed by Betty Walker, the woman who raised him, who told the New York Times directly. A suicide attempt in February, not a cry for help in the abstract sense that phrase sometimes gets used. An actual attempt. An attempt that failed, that became known to the people who loved him, and that resulted in him checking into a Department of Veterans Affairs hospital for a mental health evaluation shortly after. He stayed for a week and a half. Then he was released. Released back into the same house, the same marriage that was dissolving around him, the same financial pressure of 2 households, multiple children, a job at UPS that was not designed to hold the weight of everything he was carrying. The VA assessed him, held him for 11 days, and sent him home to the conditions that had produced the attempt in the first place. His family said he came home happy. Troy Brown, who lived under that roof, said he seemed better. And I want to be careful with that word, better, Because better is not healed. Better is what happens when the acute crisis phase passes and the person in front of you is no longer visibly drowning. Better does not mean the water is gone. It means they have found a way to stand in it without going under in a way that you can see. And for a man with 7 years of military training in compartmentalization, 7 years of learning to keep the mission moving regardless of what is happening internally, better as an external presentation can coexist with a private interior that is nothing like what it looks like from the outside. 10 days after that release, 10 days after coming home from the VA, Elkins was on Facebook. He posted publicly, in a post visible to anyone reading his page, asking God to guard his mind and his emotions when negativity arose. That post was not a private message. It was not a text to a family member. It was a public statement from a man who had recently tried to end his life and who was still, visibly, fighting something he could not name out loud. Nobody who saw that post connected it to what it actually was. Nobody reached back through the screen to ask what was happening behind it. It sat there, liked by some, scrolled past by others, and the man who wrote it kept going to work and pulling his hair out strand by strand and telling his brother-in-law he was okay. Troy Brown, who lived in that house and who loved Elkins in the way that family loves each other, imperfectly, constantly, without always having the right tools, tried every day in those final weeks. Let's sit outside. Let's play dominoes. Let's play cards. Let's go for a walk. He asked Elkins directly more than once. Do you need to go back to the hospital? Elkins told him he was okay. I'm just going to deal with it. Brown recalled him saying. Brown believed him because there was no framework available to him that said belief was not the right response. There was no protocol, no crisis line number on the refrigerator, no case manager checking in from the VA, just a brother-in-law doing his best with what he had. On April 5th, 14 days before the shooting, Elkins called his biological mother Mahalia's house. His stepfather Marcus Jackson answered. Elkins was crying. He told Marcus he was drowning in dark thoughts, including thoughts of suicide, and that Shaniqua had filed for divorce. Marcus told him he could beat it. He told him he was stronger than what he was feeling. And Elkins replied, before ending the call abruptly, with the sentence that has haunted that family from the moment Sunday morning arrived. Some people don't come back from their demons. That call ended. Nobody called a crisis line. Nobody called the police. Nobody contacted the VA to report that a recently discharged mental health patient who had already attempted suicide was now in active distress on the phone, crying, talking about dark thoughts. 2 weeks before an event that would produce the deadliest mass shooting in Louisiana history. And I want to say clearly, most families in that exact moment do exactly the same thing. Because most of the time, a call like that does not end the way this one did. Most of the time, the person gets through it. Most families absorb those calls with love and intention and a belief that being there is enough. This time it was not enough. And the difference between this time and most of the time is 8 children. The bald spot, the Facebook post, the April 5th call, the February attempt, the VA release. Every one of those things was visible. Every one of them reached someone. And not one of them was enough to produce an intervention that changed what happened in the dark between Saturday night and Sunday morning. Every warning sign in this case was a door the system could have walked through. The February attempt was a door. The VA release without documented follow-up was a door. The April 5th phone call was a door. The divorce filing was a door. The pre-marriage death threat that Shaniqua had heard and survived and never reported was a door. The court date scheduled for the morning after was a door. None of them were walked through. And 8 children paid for every single one that stayed closed. Now I want to read you something that most coverage of this case either buried or skipped entirely. The official Shreveport Police Department minute-by-minute timeline, read on camera at the follow-up press conference by police officials, of exactly what happened between the first 911 call and the moment Shamar Elkins was pronounced dead. I am going to read it the way it was given, because the timestamps do something that no amount of narrative description can do. They show you the speed, and the speed is what makes this real in a way that nothing else does. 5:55 a.m. Shreveport police received the first call regarding a disturbance at the 300 block of West 79th Street. The caller states that they are on top of a house. The suspect is inside. A male has been shot. 5:58 a.m. dispatch receives an additional call. The caller indicates the suspect is a relative. 5:59 a.m. dispatch is advised that approximately 9 individuals reside at that location. The caller states the suspect, identified as Shamar Elkins, has shot everyone inside the home. 6 a.m. 1 minute later, the caller advises that she and her children have fled from the roof and are now in the backyard. 6:01 a.m. officers arrive on scene. 6:03 a.m. officers make contact with the caller at the residence. 6:07 a.m. a second call is received regarding a shooting in the 500 block of Harrison Street. The caller states that her boyfriend has shot her, has taken her 3 children, and has fled the scene. 6:08 a.m. the victim identifies the suspect as Shamar Elkins. 6:10 a.m. dispatch links the Harrison Street shooting with the shooting on West 79th Street and confirms they are related. 6:15 a.m. officers receive information that the suspect has carjacked a red Kia Sportage at the corner of West 79th and Linwood. 6:17 a.m. a traffic unit on random patrol observes the vehicle traveling southbound on Interstate 49. The thing about growing up in Cedar Grove, without the parent who was supposed to be there, is that it does not announce itself as damage in the way that damage is supposed to look. It is quiet. It is the specific shape of an absence that a child learns to organize their life around, to build routines and relationships in the spaces that a mother was supposed to fill, without ever having language for why the space is there. Shamar Elkins had Betty Walker. He had stability. He had someone who showed up, but the wound of a mother who could not be his mother, who he only reconnected with as an adult, who was asking about his grandchildren over text 4 days before he killed them. That wound does not disappear because someone else fills the role. It lives alongside the filling. It shapes things in ways that don't always have visible edges. 7 years in the Guard, and then a return to civilian life, with no documented transition support, is a detail that has been reported in passing but not examined with the seriousness it deserves. The military does not simply train people to use weapons. It trains people to be a specific kind of person, structured, mission-oriented, operating within a command hierarchy that tells you what to do and when to do it and what success looks like. When that structure is removed and there is no equivalent structure waiting on the other side, the person does not simply revert to whoever they were before. They carry the training into conditions it was not designed for. They apply the skills to contexts that have no use for them, or that are actively harmed by them. A man trained to compartmentalize and execute brought those skills home to Cedar Grove and went to work at UPS. And the gap between what those skills were built for and what they were now being applied to is a gap that nobody in his life had the framework or the resources to help him bridge. Think about what it means to marry a person who has already told you that leaving them is a death sentence. To hear those words, specific, direct, in plain language, and to decide that the relationship is worth staying in despite them. Shaniqua Pugh made that calculation. She weighed what she knew about him, what she felt for him, what their life together already contained, the children, the history, the decade of proximity, and she stayed. And then she married him. And then she found out he was unfaithful. And then she filed. And the threat that had been sitting dormant inside their relationship since before the wedding, that she had perhaps hoped would remain theoretical, became the plan. The divorce filing is a document in a courthouse. It has a date. It has a reason listed. It names infidelity. It set in motion a legal process with a specific endpoint. April 20th, the court date. The papers ready to be signed. That endpoint was not abstract to Elkins. It was a date he knew. It was a day on a calendar that represented the legal dissolution of the system he had built his identity around. And when you understand that the family, in his internal framework, was not a collection of people he loved, but an extension of the self, a system that reflected him and belonged to him, then the court date was not just the end of a marriage. It was the end of the version of himself that the marriage had made possible. The father on the porch, the man in the Easter photos, the person Cedar Grove waved at, all of that ended on April 20th. He decided that if it ended for everyone. The community response to this case has been one of the few things in it that carries any light at all. Hundreds gathered at a vigil in Shreveport in the days following the shooting. The Louisiana Governor's Love One Louisiana Foundation moved quickly to cover all funeral costs for all 8 children, so that families in the worst moment of their lives did not also have to find money. The Community Foundation of North Louisiana launched survivor funds specifically for the families affected. These are not solutions. They do not address the structural conditions that produced this case or that will produce the next one, but they are people showing up with whatever they have, because there was nothing else left to do. The question of what accountability looks like in this case is more complicated than it appears. Elkins is dead. There is no trial, no courtroom, no verdict. The legal track that remains open is the ATF investigation into the gun, how Charles Ford, a convicted felon, came to have a weapon, how that weapon moved from his possession into the hands of another convicted felon who was legally prohibited from owning one until 2029, and what accountability exists for that chain. That investigation is ongoing. Its outcome matters not as a substitute for the trial that will not happen, but because the 8 children who died were killed with a weapon that 2 separate legal prohibitions were supposed to prevent from existing in that house. The system failed on that count as clearly as it failed on any other. And the families of Jayla, Shayla, Braylon, Khedarrion, Kayla, Layla, Markaydon, and Sariahh deserve to know that the full weight of that failure was examined and named. 6:18 a.m. officers advise they are crossing the Red River Bridge into Bossier City. 6:20 a.m. officers receive information that the children taken from the Harrison Street residence may be inside the fleeing vehicle. 6:23 a.m. officers advise they are exiting near the Swan Lake area. 6:25 a.m. officers locate the injured victims from the Harrison Street shooting. 6:29 a.m. officers make contact with the suspect through an exchange of gunfire. 6:30 a.m. officers confirm contact with the suspect in the 400 block of Brampton Lane. 6:40 a.m. officers advise that the suspect vehicle is empty. No children are located inside. 6:43 a.m. officers clear the residence at West 79th Street, where multiple deceased victims are located. 7:03 a.m. Shamar Elkins is pronounced deceased at the scene on Brampton Lane. From the first 911 call to the moment he was pronounced dead, 68 minutes. 68 minutes from the caller on the roof telling dispatch a man had been shot, to the end of a police chase in Bossier City. 68 minutes that contain 4 crime scenes, 10 shooting victims, 8 dead children, 2 critically wounded women, a carjacking, a chase across a parish line, and an exchange of gunfire that ended one man's life, while the families of 8 children were still learning what had happened to theirs. 68 minutes. And before any of it began, the children were already asleep. I want to slow down for a second before we get to the rooftop and the final questions. Just a direct ask. If you are watching this and something about this case feels familiar to you, a situation you know, a person in your life who is giving signals that nobody around them seems to be catching, drop a comment. Just one word. You do not have to explain it. You are not alone in that. And this case, more than almost anything I have covered, is the one that makes me want to say that out loud. Now let's talk about what happened on that roof, and the questions this community has been asking since Sunday. The rooftop story was covered in Part 1, but Part 1 did not have the full picture. Now we do. The people who made it off that roof were 2. The first was Kosha Pugh, Shaniqua's sister, who lived in that house, who was inside when Elkins came through. The second was Kosha's 12-year-old daughter. Not just a child who happened to be there. Kosha's daughter. They both made it to the roof. They both jumped. They both sustained broken bones in the fall. They both survived. While it was still happening, while Elkins was still in that house, Kosha managed to call a family member. She was screaming. She told him he had shot and killed the kids. That call was made from the roof, while the children inside were being killed. Think about what that means. She was on the roof. She had her daughter with her. She was injured, and she called someone because she needed someone in the world to know what was happening inside that house before she jumped. Now here is the detail that Troy Brown shared through tears that I have not been able to stop thinking about since I read it. Troy Brown is Elkins' brother-in-law. He lived in that house. He left for work at 9 p.m. on Saturday night when everything was calm. When he came back to a world that no longer contained what it had contained 12 hours earlier, he learned that his own son had died in that house that morning. He learned that his daughter was the 12-year-old who came off the roof with scratches. He learned that his wife had fractured bones from the fall. And what he said publicly, through tears, was this: "I am never going to get to throw the football with him again. These were 8 babies. Precious babies. Babies that I helped raise on a daily basis." Troy Brown had tried every day to reach Elkins, had asked if he needed to go back to the hospital, had sat outside with him and played cards and gone for walks, had done everything a person can do with the tools available to them. And he came home from work on Sunday, morning, to a house where his son was dead, his daughter had jumped from the roof, and his wife was injured. The man he had been trying to help had destroyed everything around him. The children who did not make it to the roof tried to escape another way. Bullet holes were found in the back door of the West 79th Street residence when investigators processed the scene. Children had tried to get out through that door. At least one child was found dead on the roof, apparently trying to escape. These were not children who were simply asleep and never knew what was happening. Some of them woke up. Some of them ran. Some of them tried. And they could not get out fast enough. Now let's talk about Christina Snow, because Christina Snow's story is one of the most extraordinary survival accounts in this entire case, and it has been consistently underreported relative to everything else. Christina Snow was Elkins' former girlfriend, the mother of 3 of his children. She lived on Harrison Street, 1 block from the West 79th Street home. The attack did not begin at West 79th. It began at Harrison Street. Elkins arrived at Christina's home first, around 5 a.m. He knocked on her door. She opened it. He shot her 9 times, including in the face. And then he took her 3 children, Braylon, Khedarrion, and Sariahh, and drove to West 79th Street. Christina Snow had been shot 9 times. She was on the floor, and she used Siri to call 911 because she could not physically dial. She told the dispatcher her boyfriend had shot her, had taken her children, and had fled. She gave investigators a full account of what happened at her door before sunrise. She underwent surgery. She is expected to live. Her 3 children, who Elkins took from her home and who police feared were inside the fleeing vehicle during the chase into Bossier City, were located safe when officers confirmed the suspect vehicle was empty at 6:40 a.m. Braylon, Khedarrion, and Sariahh were alive. Christina's children lived, and their mother, who was shot 9 times in the face and used a voice assistant to call for help while she was bleeding on the floor, is going to be there when they need her. Now the medication question, because the comment section asked it directly, and it deserves a direct answer. No toxicology report from this case has been publicly released. What is confirmed is that Elkins' VA treatment involved a mental health protocol during his inpatient stay. The specific medications or treatments administered have not been disclosed by any official source. What we know without question is that there was a documented suicide attempt in February, a VA inpatient stay of approximately 11 days, a release back into active crisis conditions, 10 days of visible distress on his public Facebook page, and a phone call to his family 2 weeks before the shooting, where he told them directly he did not know if he would survive his own demons. Whether any pharmaceutical factor contributed to what happened on April 19th is a question that the full investigation must answer publicly. It has not been answered yet, and until it is, the honest position is to hold the question open and wait for the evidence rather than fill the gap with speculation. And the unconfirmed theory, the one the comment section kept circling back to in the more private threads. Multiple posts on Facebook and TikTok, circulating widely since the shooting and not confirmed by any official source or named investigator, suggested that the infidelity Shaniqua cited in her divorce filing may have involved another man, that there may have been a hidden dimension to Elkins' private life, an identity he kept entirely separate from everything Cedar Grove knew about him, and that the exposure or potential exposure of that dimension, in the context of a divorce proceeding that would put records into a legal file, may have deepened a crisis that ended on April 19th. I am going to say again what I said earlier in this video, because precision matters here. This has not been confirmed. No named investigator has addressed it. No family member on record has named it. The nature of the infidelity cited in the divorce filing has not been publicly specified by any official source. What is confirmed is that the divorce was filed citing infidelity, and that the full nature of that infidelity remains unspecified in the public record. What I will say is this. This case is built on a pattern of hidden interiors. A man who performed normalcy while planning something catastrophic. A man who smiled for Easter photos and took his daughter to dinner and waved at his neighbor, and who was already somewhere else entirely in his head while he was doing all of it. Whether the hidden interior extended to a dimension of his identity that nobody in his life knew about is a question that belongs to this investigation. It deserves an answer, and the community that lost 8 children to whatever was living beneath that surface has a right to know what it was. I want to come back to that doorbell footage one more time. A man running through a Shreveport street in the early morning dark. Not panicking, not spiraling, moving with the specific kind of calm that comes from having already made every decision and executed every step. The children were already dead. The house on West 79th Street had already been processed. The Harrison Street address had already been visited. Christina Snow had already been shot 9 times and left on her floor. Kosha Pugh and her daughter had already jumped from the roof, and the man in that footage was moving toward the last thing left on his list. Now hold that image next to everything else this case gave us. The boy born to a teenager in active addiction who could not raise him. The family friend who stepped in and loved him and saw nothing in the weekend before the shooting to suggest what was coming. The grandmother asking for a kiss to pass along. The bald spot. The Facebook post asking God to guard his mind. The April 5th phone call, and the words that have not left that family since. Some people don't come back from their demons. Hold all of that next to the 8 doors the system had and did not walk through. The February suicide attempt was a door. The VA release without documented follow-up was a door. The April 5th phone call was a door. The divorce filing for infidelity was a door. The pre-marriage death threat that Shaniqua had survived and never reported was a door. The court date the morning after was a door. The 2 prior criminal convictions, including a weapons charge that legally barred him from owning a firearm until 2029, was a door. And the ATF investigation into how a man legally prohibited from owning a gun obtained 2 of them is a door that has still not been fully opened. Every single one of those things was a moment where the system could have intervened. Not because anyone is villainous, not because anyone failed deliberately, but because the infrastructure required to catch a man this far into crisis, a mental health system with real follow-up, a domestic violence framework with real reach, a firearm prohibition system with real teeth, was not there in the way it needed to be. And 8 children paid for every door that stayed closed. The Louisiana governor's Love One Louisiana Foundation covered all funeral costs for all 8 children. The Community Foundation of North Louisiana launched dedicated survivor funds for the families. Hundreds gathered for a community vigil. 2 women are still in recovery. A 12-year-old girl is somewhere carrying what she saw and what she left behind on that roof. And a brother-in-law who tried every day to reach a man he loved is learning to live in a world where he will never throw a football with his son again. And Charles Ford, the 56-year-old convicted felon arrested 2 days after the shooting in connection with the rifle used in the attack, is working his way through a federal process that will determine how a legally prohibited man provided a weapon to another legally prohibited man, and what accountability looks like for the 8 children that weapon was used to kill. That question is still open. It deserves an answer that is loud enough for those families to hear. Now let's say their names, because we're going to say them every time. Not once. Every time this case is discussed, every time this video is shared, every time someone in a comment section asks what the story was about. The answer includes 8 names. Jayla Elkins, 3 years old. Shayla Elkins, 5 years old. Braylon Snow, 5 years old. Khedarrion Snow, 6 years old. Kayla Pugh, 6 years old. Layla Pugh, 7 years old. Markaydon Pugh, 10 years old. Sariahh Snow, 11 years old. 8 children, shot in their sleep, on a Sunday morning in Shreveport, Louisiana, by the man who was supposed to be the reason they were safe. They tried to get out through the back door. They tried to get out through the roof. They tried, and they deserved every single year that was taken from them before the sun came fully up on April 19th, 2026. If you or someone you know is in a domestic violence situation right now, The National Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-800-799-7233. Available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, confidential. You do not need proof. You do not need to have a plan. You just need to make the call. And if you are in a mental health crisis, if you are having dark thoughts, if you feel like some people don't come back from their demons, please call or text 988. The Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is there right now. Before anything else, if this case has stayed with you, if Part 1 brought you here and Part 2 gave you what you came for, subscribe to Crime Motives right now and hit that like button. Share both videos, because the only thing worse than what happened on West 79th Street on April 19th, 2026 is if the world decides by next week that it has already processed it and moved on. These 8 children are not a news cycle. They are not a statistic. They are 8 names that deserve to be said out loud for as long as anyone is paying attention. Don't let the world move on. Say their names. We will see you next time. And next time, we're going into a case where the cover-up ran deeper than the crime itself, where the people whose job it was to find the truth were the ones building the lie, where the deception was so layered, so deliberate, so institutionally protected that it held for years before a single thread finally came loose. By the time we are done, you will not look at the systems built to protect you the same way again. You do not want to miss it.